Hello and welcome to our In the News in Zechariah study tonight. Before I begin, let me again thank you all for your prayers and also tell you that next week we won't have a Monday night study because I'll be in MD Anderson in Houston for an evaluation. So we really covet your prayers. Please don't stop. We're so thankful for them. All right, let's start in the news tonight. This one's pretty shocking. If you can see that picture, this is the third person dies after being struck by lightning outside the White House. So the third person died Thursday evening after being hit by lightning at the Lafayette Park outside the White House, police have said. The White House issued a statement after the couple had died, offering condolences. After the lightning strike, officials arrived in the scene to find 4 people with critical, life-threatening injuries. The spokesman for the D.C. Fire and EMS said in a briefing. I don't know, sometimes I look at things like that and I think about, is God warning our administration? That's a very, very close strike. And amazingly, somebody caught it on film. Let me give you another one. Another one. It's pretty disturbing. Obviously, in the news is disturbing. Disturbing symbolism as Commonwealth Games recreate worship of Baal. They aren't even trying to hide it anymore. During the opening ceremonies of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, England, on July 28th, a giant mechanical bull with glowing red eyes was rolled out into the center of Alexander Stadium. It absolutely dwarfed all the human participants that were involved in the performance. If you look at this picture, look how small those people are compared to this bull. It's gigantic. All of the human performers, here's that thing that's really shocking, gathered around the giant bull and literally began to bow down and worship it. A total of 72 nations participated in the Commonwealth Games. And so this opening ceremony was being viewed on country televisions, countless television screens all over the planet. The organizers knew exactly what they were doing, but they were also counting on the fact that the vast majority of the general population would not consciously catch on to what was actually taking place. Now, if you're a student of the Bible, you know exactly what's happening here. Unfortunately, most people aren't a student of the Bible at all. The bull has always been a symbol of the ancient deity from the Middle East known as Baal. Baal took the shape of a bull or a ram and had associations with fertility. This god also, apparently according to Canaanite lore, defeated El. El is our God, it's the God Almighty, and had associations with the sun and with thunder. If we could go back thousands of years and roll out a giant bull with glowing red eyes for the people of the ancient Middle East, they would instantly understand what was going on. Nobody would need to tell them that it was a statue of Baal and that they were intended to worship it. It is also interesting to note that the ancient deity known as Moloch, or Molech, was also often represented by a bull. In addition to sexual rituals, Moloch worship included child sacrifice or passing children through the fire. In the Valley of Megiddo, they had a massive bronze bull of Moloch, and the belly was open, and they would actually place the children in a little chamber so that they could hear them scream through these horns that went through his nostrils and his mouth. So this is something that the ancient Israelites would instantly have recognized. Unfortunately, no one here does. By the way, the music from Black Sabbath was played as they were bowing down and worshiping this colossal beast. So why do they have to perform some sort of incredibly bizarre ritual in which they bow down to this beast? Well, we're absolutely meant to understand that the performers are worshiping the bull. After the bull is calmed down, by the way, at one point 3 women are lifted up on the top of the bull to ride it, which really got my attention because Revelation chapter 17 verse 3 says, "Then he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns." The Bible says it's the mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abomination of the earth. It says, "And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly," Revelation says. It's also been announced that this giant bull will have a permanent place in Birmingham, England, once the games are over. We live in a very strange world, and we live in very strange times, and it's only going to get worse. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the population is still dead asleep. They have no idea why the elite of the world are doing what they are doing, and even though it's happening right in front of their eyes. Let me give you a little bit more talk about Israel. And Israel is really pretty on fire today, and I mean that kind of in a literal sense. This is a picture of the Iron Dome and hundreds of rockets that have been shot from Gaza. Israel unleashed a wave of airstrikes Friday on Gaza, killing at least 10 people, including a senior militant. Israel said it targeted the Islamic Jihad militant group in response to an imminent threat following the recent arrest of another senior militant. Hours later, Palestinian militants launched a barrage, almost over 100, of rockets as air raid sirens wailed in Israel, and the two sides drew closer to an all-out war. Islamic Jihad claimed to have fired over 100 rockets, as I've said. So a video released by Israel and their military shows the strikes blowing up 3 guard towers with suspected militants in them. Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid said, quote, Israel will not sit idly by while there are those who are trying to harm its civilians. The Israeli military said early estimates were that around 15 fighters were killed. Islamic Jihad said Taizer al-Jabari, its commander for northern Gaza, was among the dead. The Israeli military spokesman said the strikes were in response to an imminent threat from 2 militant squads armed with anti-tank missiles. What Israel did is immediately put up the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome is full of Patriot missiles, and it shoots down the missiles that are coming from Palestine. And of course, there's a lot of propaganda coming from the Palestinians saying that Israel didn't shoot them down, and that other rockets were really Israel's aimed at something else. So one of the things that I think about when I think about this is Islamic Jihad and Hamas are diametrically opposed to each other. They are both sanctioned against Israel, don't recognize Israel as a nation. And there's a little power struggle going on, a big power struggle in Palestine. But both of them come to the agreement when it has anything to do with firing rockets on Israel. So the last war, they've had 15 minor and major wars Israel has with Palestinians. The last one was several years ago. But everybody's saying that there's another one gearing up, and it's gearing up right away. It's interesting to me. I think Auburn University's basketball team is in Israel right now. And we certainly pray that they be protected. But so far, no Israeli dead. Most of those rockets are just kind of shot out randomly. So, but it does mean that front is back and it's open again. Let me also tell you this about Israel. Even though we love Israel and we are supposed to bless Israel, it doesn't mean that Israel is a spiritual nation. As a matter of fact, it's 88% secular. And Israel is kind of leading the world in a way to countless cashless digital surveillance state. Now we know that China has one, but Israel is really almost putting China in the background. Israel has just banned using cash for purchases larger than $1,700 and instead requires residents to use digital transfers or debit transactions. Excuse me. Israeli officials have claimed that the new cash limit is to combat criminal organizations that rely solely on cash trades. Now we understand the logic of that. We understand that societies may want a cashless society because of illegal drugs and people who deal in cash illegally. Unfortunately, that leads to a cashless society not just for criminals, but for everyone. And once it starts to take shape, it's going to get global attention. It already is. Israel's been at the forefront of adopting a digital ID and digital currency technology, along with digital fingerprints. Israel right now is trying to fingerprint everyone in the country digitally. And again, it's a wide sweep to catch criminals, but obviously everybody's caught up in it. In 2020, Israel was among 8 nations that formed a digital identity working group to discuss how to implement a global digital identity system for trade and travel around the world. Other members of the group right now are Canada, the Netherlands, the UK, Singapore, New Zealand, and Finland. And there's a list of countries ready to go on. The country's interior minister also asked to extend the collection, as I said, of fingerprints for Israel's national biometric ID database. It's clear our precedent has been set, and Israel and the Western world are edging closer and closer towards a cashless society and a digital surveillance system in which there may be no return. And I've been warning about this for probably 7 years. And even though I've said it for that long, it's taken, I guess people still are unconscious of it, but it's coming, and it will come to America. There's no question about it. So when you think about the end times, and you think about the times we're living in, closer and closer we inch, or probably step, closer and closer to those last days. We're obviously in them, but we're watching world events really shape up to that. Excuse me, continuing with Israel, let me give you this one. Let me just see if I can get it over here. Here we go. Israel's becoming a cashless society, which I just told you about. Just banned large transactions. And then this one, which is more of a positive note. Ezekiel's dry bones live. Israel becomes the center of Jewish life. I think it was 3 years ago, the first time that Israel surpassed any other nation as having the most Jews. They actually surpassed the United States. The United States had the most Jews up to 3 years ago. And then Israel took over. This article is pretty interesting. Now we know all over the Old Testament, all over it, there are literally dozens and dozens of references of God bringing back the nation of Israel to its own land in the last days, gathering them from all the nations. And also that Israel would be prosperous and would generate its own from within. Listen to this article. It's predicted that by the year 2048, the 100th anniversary of the State of Israel, 2/3 of the world's Jewish population, about 12 million Jews, will live in Israel. God's continuing to bring them from around the world, and natural growth. Natural growth of the Jewish population of Israel is 2% per year, or 4 times greater than the average in other developed nations. Population surges, by the way, in the United States, there is no population growth. For every person that is born, somebody dies. First time ever, by the way. Population surge is based on high fertility numbers, and better living conditions are frequent in history. But now we're seeing it in Israel. In 2018, an article in Mosaic magazine, Ophir Havir attributed the increase in fertility in Israel to an emphasis on family welfare and continuity, writing that Israeli society has balanced rising levels of affluence and education with continued adherence to a family-oriented culture. Think of that. Israeli medical advances in areas such as prenatal care and fertility treatments have also contributed to the increase in the Israeli birth rate. The challenge for Israelis would be to find a way to accommodate a larger population in such a small and densely populated state. It's kind of an exciting news article, but again, Israel's only the size of New Jersey. So as it continues to grow, obviously it's going to have to make more and more areas for population. Let me give you this one, talking about economy. And again, I've been telling you this. Here come the layoffs. Big companies preparing for recession with massive job cuts. When the economy slows down, layoffs obviously, naturally, and inevitably happen. We witnessed this on a very large scale, and remember in 2008, in 2009, and now it's beginning to happen again. You know this. You've been around in any city you've been in, and you've seen people hiring. Everybody's hiring, and you're still seeing some of those signs, but that's about to go away. U.S. economic numbers are rapidly getting worse, and companies all across America don't want to get caught with bloated payrolls as we plunge into a recession. Many of the firms that are laying off workers are either in the real estate industry or the tech industry. 11 big companies have announced layoffs within the last 2 weeks. Let me tell you about them. Ultratech Inc. says they'll be laying off more than 600 workers. Electric truck maker Rivian will be laying off approximately 840 workers. 7-Eleven has announced it'll be eliminating 880 corporate jobs. Shopify is laying off about 1,000 people. Venmo says they'll be eliminating 6% of its current workforce. Redfin will be reducing the size of its workforce by 8%. Compass will be reducing the size of its workforce by 10%. Remax will be reducing the size of its workforce by 17%. Robinhood will be reducing the size of its workforce by 23%. It's being reported that Ford is preparing to cut as many as 8,000 jobs in the coming weeks. Geico has closed every single one of their offices in the state of California, and that will result in vast numbers of workers losing their jobs. Geico is one of the largest insurance companies in the United States. It closed all 38 of its California offices on Monday, resulting in hundreds of workers being laid off. Amazon has announced that it reduced the size of its workforce. It has already reduced the size of its workforce. You ready for this? By approximately 100,000 workers in just 1 quarter. With recession fears mounting and inflation, the war in Ukraine, and the lingering pandemic taking a toll, many tech companies are rethinking their staffing needs, with some of them instituting hiring freezes, rescinding offers, and making rounds of layoffs. Eventually, this wave of job losses will become a tsunami, and millions of Americans will suddenly find out that they are unable to continue paying their bills. Meanwhile, our new housing crash is starting to pick up speed as well. In fact, we just witnessed an absolutely massive spike in the number of Americans that are searching for the term "sell my home fast" on Google. Online search volume for "sell my home fast" spiked at a whopping 2,750%. And things are going to get worse and worse for the housing market as the Federal Reserve continues to raise interest rates. Decades of incredibly foolish decisions have brought us to this point, and instead of reversing course, our leaders continue to take us down the exact same road. So we shall reap what we have sown, and it appears that there is an enormous amount of pain on the horizon. Speaking of the economy, I don't have a picture for it, but I'm going to tell you about it. Or do I? There it is. Just a taste of what will happen to our economy if we go to war with China. And this is really kind of shocking. I want to read a lot of it for you. Chinese forces are gathering directly across the Kinmen Islands. Where are they? Well, I gave you a little chart for this. Here's Taiwan, here's China, and the Kinmen Islands are right off the coast of China, but they're owned by Taiwan. Now, those islands are currently controlled by Taiwan, as I said, and China may be preparing a move to grab them. If China actually does such a thing, all hell could break loose. Taiwan could potentially start launching missiles at any Chinese units that try to invade the Kinmen Islands. And if that happens, the Chinese obviously and inevitably would return fire. In addition, there is no way that the Biden administration would allow such a move by China to go unanswered. Earlier this year, the entire world was shocked when Russian forces moved into the Ukraine, and we could be right on the very verge of another historic moment that changes everything. Of course, we would not be talking about this right now. Are you ready? If Nancy Pelosi had not gone to Taiwan. There is one question that keeps me pondering. Why did Nancy Pelosi really go to Taiwan? It wasn't necessary. Top politicians such as Pelosi usually have very selfish motives for many of the decisions that they make. Does Pelosi think that this trip will make her look presidential? Could she actually be planning a run for the presidency if Joe Biden can't do it in 2024? And obviously he can't. She's very close to the end of her career. Man, it should have ended a long time ago, in my opinion. And so maybe she figures that she should give it a shot before she's gone for good. In any event, Pelosi's stunt has absolutely infuriated Chinese. And they're promising that there will be severe consequences for those who play with fire. They directed it at Pelosi, but now they're doing it at Taiwan also. The communists raged Pelosi's visit was a serious violation of their sovereignty and vowed to take all necessary measures. A lot of people expected the Chinese to respond militarily as soon as Pelosi arrived in Taiwan. When that didn't happen, China was relentlessly mocked on social media in the Western world. But that's not how things work. Military operations don't happen after a day after something. They plan them out. So it may be days or even weeks before we learn exactly what China has planned. Meanwhile, the Chinese have announced that there will be a series of live fire drills in the waters off Taiwan from Thursday through Sunday. And in fact, they've been doing those. The website of Taiwan's presidential office went dark Tuesday due to an alleged distributed denial of service attack, with other government websites also impacted. Tense moment. The attacks took place hours ahead of the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. The Chinese government threatened to take action to respond to the trip, and Taiwan reportedly readying air raid shelters in anticipation of a potential Chinese attack. Chinese tanks are massing on the coast of Fujian along the Taiwan Strait. The closest point between China and Taiwan is the Kinmen Islands. Chinese propaganda released yesterday showed off their military as soldiers in the clips vowed to fight to the death for China. Here in the United States, we are being told to disregard the propaganda and the empty threats of China and the Chinese are supposedly making. But are they really empty threats? What if they aren't? What if China really means what they say? Russia, I think something that Caitlin Johnson tweeted sums up things quite well. He said, Russia, don't cross our red lines in Ukraine or we'll take action. U.S. politicians, they're bluffing, cross the red lines. Russia invades. China, don't cross our red lines in Taiwan or we'll take action. U.S. politicians, they're bluffing, cross those red lines. Ultimately, the Chinese were probably planning to invade Taiwan fairly soon anyway. But Pelosi's visit certainly has the potential to greatly accelerate matters. By the way, I don't want to be political on you, but if you think Nancy Pelosi is the greatest thing since sliced bread, then you're listening to the wrong broadcast tonight. Because Pelosi is damaging not only to internal United States, but now to our external, our foreign policy. Taiwanese defense officials have canceled the leave of some of their soldiers and officers to immediately prepare for the chance of war in response to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Asia this week, according to local reports. Sadly, war with China is coming, and it's just not a matter of time. So what would such a conflict do to the United States economy? Let's set aside the fact that Pelosi may have been the catalyst to something that's happening, and what really would happen. And here's another flaw of America. Here's where America has no foresight whatsoever. Here's where freedom and greed has put us in a position that makes us vulnerable to China. What I'm about to tell you should shock every single one of us. And if we don't listen to it now, we need to listen to it. We will listen to it sooner or later. In fact, now's the time to act. Unfortunately, because of the greed of corporations of America, we won't do it. But we are vulnerable, extremely vulnerable. Listen to this, and you'll probably be as shocked as I was when I read it. Well, for one thing, what would it do to our our economy? For one thing, it would absolutely devastate the pharmaceutical industry. Consider that Chinese firms are set to supply more than 90% of U.S. antibiotics. Can you imagine having a bacteria and not being able to get antibiotics for it? 70% of acetaminophen, which is Tylenol, by the way, and almost half of the anticoagulant heparin. Some studies suggest that up to 80% of the basic ingredients in U.S. drugs come from the People's Republic of China, the PRC. China is also the second largest exporter in the world of biologics and the prime source of medical devices per the FDA. Imagine us going to war with China and God forbid someone you know goes in for a routine operation, but they can't get the medical devices for the operation. This is horrific. The food industry would also be turned upside down. According to CNN.com, experts believe that it's almost impossible to have a diet without foods that were not produced in China. Products such as chips and garlic are produced in China. Spices and herbs such as ginger and garlic are grown in China and exported to foreign markets, including the United States. Chinese factories make vegetarian meat products. Many canned foods on market shelves were manufactured in China. China produces so much of our farm machinery. Let me stop before I continue in this list. President Trump had a hard-nosed view of China. He was giving them tariffs and taxing them. Why do you think he was doing that? This president, history is going to treat him very well. He knew that we were subject to China, that if China turned off the spigot, we would dry up, we would be nothing. He knew it. And he was trying to stop American companies with their greed, trying to produce everything in China with cheap labor, child labor mostly, from coming back to the United States. It would have saved the United States, especially if I'm saying this, and I hope I am saying it, preemptive of a war. If that war, God forbid, comes, President Trump will be heralded as someone that was unbelievable in his insight. Unfortunately, that's not happening right now. Let me continue on. So they supply tractors, egg incubators, harvesters. They're all manufactured in China. Chainsaws, wood chippers, shredders are also produced in the country. Elevators, bulldozers are also assembled in China. So you're starting to get the picture? We should never become so dependent on Chinese production because it really is a major national security threat. Of course, the Chinese also produce a lot of our clothes. Chinese factories manufacture winter clothes, gloves, mittens, and hats for consumers around the world. And by the way, they do it cheap. And how do they do it cheap? Because they have no child labor laws. You have children that are 5, 6, and 7 working in these factories 10 to 12 hours a day. Also maternity clothes, infant clothes, as well as wedding dresses and tuxedos, underwear, t-shirts, and slips are among the items exported from China to consumers around the world. Sports caps are also produced in China, as belts and bras. And it turns out that 70% of our shoes come from China too. Same with 72% of our smartphones. Imagine that. God forbid that we don't get the latest smartphone. The artificial sweeteners in Diet Coke, toys, furniture, sports equipment, what you buy every time you go to Target. The moment we go to war with them, the flow of cheap goods from China completely stops. In addition, once the Chinese invade Taiwan, and by the way, they want Taiwan, and you'll see why, There will be an absolutely excruciating computer chip shortage. Those computer chips go in F-35 Phantom jets. They go in your computers. They go in your smartphones. They go in your TVs. They go in almost anything that's electronic. It was recently reported that chip makers in Taiwan would have a 66% share of the total global market by the end of 2023. As I have discussed previously, and I've told you this, just about every industry in the United States relies on equipment that contains computer chips. If the flow of chips from Taiwan is eliminated, the entire global economy would come to a crashing halt. Now, how does that fit into prophecy? We know there's going to be a one world economy. We know that. And all it will take is somebody to pull all the strings together to do that, an Antichrist. So we're not just talking about a recession, and we're not talking about a depression either. We're talking about the world stopping. Talking about an economic collapse on a scale that most people would not be able to even comprehend right now. So this is a war we're not currently prepared to win, and it's a timeline that's just been accelerated. Thank you, Nancy Pelosi. I'd like to tell you that all the news is good, but as I share the news from week to week with you, and it seems to be horrific, and by the way it is, and in time producing news, let me remind you that the closer we get to the end, the more it gets to the point where we win. You are on the right side. If you're saved tonight, I believe that's your only answer and your only advantage to anything that's coming. I think if somebody doesn't know Christ, there really is no hope. And I'm not a defeatist. I'm an optimist. Throw me out of the 88 level floor of a high rise, and I'll be happy when I'm at the 44th floor. I'll still be excited. So I'm an optimist, but I see the writing on the wall, and I see the things happening in the world that are absolutely unbelievable, and it's an accelerating pace. So the reason why I teach and preach, the reason why I give in the news, number one, is to alert us to the necessity of today is the day of our salvation. And it's also to inform us of things that our current media is not giving us. And then